Hello, welcome to my stream. My name is Nathan Hatch, and today we're going to be talking about respiration and breathing techniques and meditation and CO2 and all of this other fun stuff related to metabolic health and wellness. If you have not come to a stream before, I'm going to give people about 10 minutes to come in, and so if you're watching the VOD, you can skip ahead to when we actually start the stream later, if you are interested in learning about that. And then also live stream, I answer questions and chat with guests. You guys, listeners, about anything that you want. So hang around, and we'll talk about some good stuff. Let me make sure this is actually working. I haven't streamed in a little while. Yep, it looks like we're on and live. Yep. So, we'll be back in a little bit. Getting started shortly. All right. Well, we're almost at 10 minutes. I don't have anything else I can do to pass the time. Have another drink of my tea here, I guess. Oh, it's cold though. It'd be really nice if I had some warm tea at the moment. Welcome, everyone who's here. So, let's go to the starting screen. This is the starting screen. I haven't streamed for quite a little while, which, like, I always remind you all that when I haven't streamed for a while, it's usually because I'm doing a lot of research that is really preoccupying my mind, and I don't have the mental space to actually stream. So when I disappear for a little while, it's usually for good reasons. I've been making a lot of progress on my cystic fibrosis research, which has been paying off very, very well. And I'm literally almost done with my update. I'm pretty sure that I'll be done with it before the holidays, so that will be really good. But anyway, welcome. Again, if you're new here, you don't know what this is, my name is Nathan Hatch. I'm a health and wellness advocate. And I talk about human biology and diet and all of that fun stuff, medicine. But I am not a medical professional though. And I just give research information, my own and that of others, and scientific communication. So somebody was asking me the other day about doing a stream on breathing and things like mouth taping and CO2 and CPAP and booty echo, because there is a lot of supplemental information out there on breathing and CO2 and how it relates to human health and wellness, and a lot of it is misinformation. And so it'd be good to really understand exactly how breathing and respiration works and how it benefits human health. So let's start off with the basics. Basically, when you're breathing, everyone knows pretty much that we need oxygen in order to be alive. And oxygen is taken into our lungs through the air and transferred to your bloodstream, carried by what is called hemoglobin, which is a substance in red blood cells that makes them red. And it binds to the oxygen and transports it through your body and delivers it to cells, where cells then use it in what's called oxidative respiration or oxidative phosphorylation, where cells burn energy from like carbohydrates and fats and other things like that, and make energy out of it. And oxygen is required for that process. So if you can't breathe or you can't get oxygen, then obviously then you expire. And after our cells use oxygen, it results in the creation of CO2. And CO2 is then also transported back through the bloodstream, back to the lungs, where it is then exhaled. And you breathe out. And so we breathe in oxygen, essentially, and we breathe out CO2. It's a very, very, very severe oversimplification of the process. But that's how it works, basically. So a lot of people, when, especially like if you're from like repeat communities or other, alternative health communities, a bit about respiration, because respiration is intimately connected to the creation of energy and how the human body works and how health is achieved. And so understanding respiration and addressing respiration and the factors that that control respiration helps a lot therapeutically for you to get better, because respiration is required for the production of energy. So if you can improve respiration, then you improve the production of energy, which then gives more energy for your cells to use to fix themselves, to regenerate themselves, to regrow. And yeah, so there's a lot of a lot of emphasis on respiration. The problem being, though, is that most people don't understand exactly how respiration works. So things can sound really great, and people can, you know, give advice or talk about certain practices that you might use to try to affect respiration. For instance, one very significant disability that occurs from an inability to respirate sufficiently is sleep apnea, when people require a CPAP machine in order to breathe at night. That when you reach illness that severe, your rate of respiration is so low that you risk having very severe health consequences from it. And the body instinctively causes you to hold your breath, and so you don't really breathe very much. So a person that has sleep apnea, what happens is they don't really breathe at night. The body actually holds its breath while you're unconscious, and then you'll wake up gasping for air. And that happened to me when I was 33, 34. I'm 43 now. When I first started my health recovery, and it was extremely alarming. I mean, like it's you just wake up from a dead sleep gasping for air. It's very frightening. You feel you're not getting air in your lungs, so you think you're choking or dying, and it takes a few minutes for you to breathe to get that going back again. And yeah, it was really, really unpleasant. But as I was getting better, and I was going through, like, you know, forums and like alternative health circles to try to figure out how to improve my health, like, you know, there's certain things that are directly connected to breathing and metabolic respiration, like thyroid function. But a lot of people in forums had certain strategies that they would try. For instance, like mouth taping, because um, one of the things that happens too when you have respiration issues is that you tend to mouth breathe a lot instead of breathe through your nose. So people will like tape their mouth shut during the night so that they breathe, so that they don't ventilate so much CO2. Or like I mentioned briefly when we started, are like breathing disciplinary practices such as like Buteyko. Buteyko, I don't know how to say that. Buteyko, because that is a sort of a meditative practice where you try to you control your breathing in a certain way to decrease exhalation, so that you build up carbon dioxide inside the body. And the reason we want to do that, or people try to do that, is because an increase in CO2 concentration in your body actually helps mitochondria to respirate more. You'd think, if obviously you can actually well, actually, and so this is kind of a problem too. So I don't know if this is true, but this is like, I think this is like an urban legend that I saw on forums. It's probably, it could very easily be true, that somebody who was trying to hello Jay, me too. Welcome. So people who yeah, so this could be very well true. I don't know if it is though, but I think somebody was trying to increase their CO2 like this because they heard that it was good for you, and they got like a big CO2 canister and were like breathing CO2, and they asphyxiated themselves because while CO2 is really good for mitochondria, excess actually impairs respiration. And the reason that this occurs, and this is actually the reason also how how our body facilitates respiration, is that oxygen and carbon dioxide actually naturally displace each other in nature. So if you have an excess of oxygen, it will overcome the carbon dioxide, and if you have an excess of carbon dioxide, it will overcome the oxygen. And our body actually operates on that principle of physics. When you breathe in oxygen from the air into your lungs, it displaces the carbon dioxide that's in red blood cells, and so then you exhale that carbon dioxide to the atmosphere when you breathe out. And then that same principle happens when oxygen is delivered to cells. CO2 being excreted from cells pushes the oxygen off of hemoglobin and into tissues, so that your tissues then receive oxygen. So our body actually operates on that principle, actually. And that's how respiration is achieved. And also when scientists like me say respiration, we're not necessarily talking about breathing, although breathing is a process of respiration. Respiration generally refers to the acquisition or use of oxygen in the creation of energy. So cells also respirate by receiving oxygen and using it in their energy creation pathways. So very often, like especially like in a stream like this, when I say respiration, I'm referring to the whole process of acquisition of oxygen, not necessarily just the act of breathing itself. So so understanding how CO2 and oxygen work in concert with each other, and our body utilizes that in order to accomplish the generation of energy, is really profitable when you're trying to improve your health, because that's like one of the most fundamental pathways in our entire body. And so many systems in our body also govern that. For instance, the function of hemoglobin is in red blood cells is to literally capture oxygen to deliver it to cells so that they can respirate properly. Because without oxygen, that wouldn't happen. So it's very important. And then the structures that create energy in our body mostly are the mitochondria. Everybody's heard that they're like the power center of the cell, and they require oxygen, and they produce CO2 in the electron transport chain, where there's several different enzymes that line up inside of mitochondria, and they receive or donate electrons and channel them through the mitochondria in a specific way. And the channeling of those electrons is the actual process that creates energy. And oxygen is required as a receptor for those electrons. Because when you hear the term oxidized or oxidation or reactive oxygen species, it's because oxygen readily takes electrons. And that act of taking an electron is what oxidation is. And it can be kind of confusing because you can also have oxidation without oxygen being involved at all. In fact, oxidation really is just the removal of an electron from a atom or molecule, and it's called oxygen, I think, because it was it's called oxidation because oxygen is such a readily oxidizing atom. It very, very, very greedily takes electrons. So the respiration process uses oxygen as a deposition for the electrons that are moved through the electron transport chain that creates energy. So you have to have it in order to actually create energy. Because CO2 counterbalances oxygen, and is involved in this process, CO2 actually stimulates more mitochondrial activity and more mitochondrial density. Mitochondria engage in fusion and fission, where they will either combine with each other or they'll split and multiply depending on certain factors in the cellular environment. And the more CO2 you have, the more mitochondrial fission actually occurs. And you get an increase in mitochondria, which means that you also get an increase in energy production, but you also require more oxygen and more substrate like carbohydrate in order to actually create that energy. So a lot of the end goal in metabolic rehabilitation is actually to increase mitochondria, but that can also cause like unintended side effects if you like don't know what you're doing. And your body, our body purposefully regulates that because mitochondria do consume substrate like carbohydrate and B vitamins and elements like zinc and copper and all that stuff, and calcium and sodium. They don't necessarily consume all those, but they're all involved in cellular pathways that are orbit this process. Can be metabolically expensive. So if you like run out of certain nutrients, you die. So our body regulates the use of those nutrients to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. So respiration is like really, really important when you're trying to rehabilitate your metabolic health. And thyroid is one of like the biggest regulators of metabolic respiration, actually. So thyroid hormone, and the other factors that also in turn regulate thyroid itself, like thyroid stimulating hormone, are really important for actual metabolic respiration. Because thyroid can, a thyroid actually stimulates respiration, or oppositely, a lack of thyroid prevents it. And for instance, our thyroid operates actually too on circadian rhythms. It'll be higher at certain parts of the day and lower when, like when you're sleeping, for instance. It's also, excuse me, it's also you also respirate less like during the winter time when you have a sunlight, when there's not as much sunlight around. And these are all adaptive survival mechanisms that our body has evolved to help us persist and to survive in environmental and nutritional stresses that all factor into respiration. So when this person asked me to do a stream on this topic, I thought it was actually really relevant, because a lot of people do try to actually manipulate mitochondria and respiration as a means to affect some of these changes. But the problem is that most of these strategies don't do that at all. And one of the fundamental misunderstandings is that respiration is entirely a process of biochemistry, and it has nothing to do with like strategies like bag breathing or mouth taping or using a CPAP machine or even doing booty echo. Yes, you can increase your CO2 retention through those methods, but the problem is that oxygen tension and CO2 tension normalizes literally within just a few seconds of no longer doing those things. They don't have any long-term effects on mitochondria. Like, you can't do booty echo enough to actually change your mitochondria respiration patterns generally. It will change it while you're doing it. And there's a reason, like when, one of the treatments for like panic attacks, actually, I should probably put panic attack on the thumbnail here. Panic attacks are very specifically acute interruptions in the flow of carbon dioxide and oxygen and respiration. That's one of the reasons, like, when people have a panic attack, they'll often start to hyperventilate. And there's a reason why, like, breathing into a bag when you have a panic attack helps a lot, because it helps to increase and retain the carbon dioxide that your body's exhaling, which helps to induce relaxation. But you can't do that all the time. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you were to, if you walked around with a bag on your face all day long, you might actually pass out from asphyxiation as well. You need to have a continual flow of oxygen, not just high CO2. And so doing things like mouth taping and even using a CPAP machine, they don't have long-term benefits to your metabolic health, because they don't do anything to affect the underlying biochemical process that actually mediates the production of CO2 in the first place. That is solely the domain of metabolic regulation that our body does in response to environmental conditions and stimuli. So, and this was one of the major problems too that I didn't recognize when I first was trying to get better. Because I dove into like forums where most people don't really know what they're talking about, I got a lot of bad advice. And I tried experimenting and starting to do things. And bag breathing helped me a little bit, because one of the things that happened, because I had cancer and severe thyroid disease, my body could not respirate hardly at all, and it felt like I was drowning in the air. Like, I literally could not get enough oxygen into my lungs, no matter what I did. And and bag breathing really helped to do that, because remember again that CO2 and oxygen displace each other, and you need enough of both in order to actually facilitate respiration. This was one of the major problems that was occurring during the coronavirus pandemic, is that when you hook someone up to a breathing machine, it doesn't really usually fix the problem, which is why so many people died that were on breathing machines, is because those don't rebalance your CO2 and oxygen levels. They really just usually give you oxygen. And because we also need CO2 to actually utilize that oxygen, it doesn't really matter if you're breathing oxygen. It can help as long as you have enough CO2. And so you'll see like old people with lung disease on oxygen and stuff like that. And it does help a little bit, but the reason it doesn't cure their problem is because their body initially is not making enough CO2 in the first place. So it doesn't even matter if you like do practices like this, because there's just not enough oxygen. But that's also how our body responds to that problem in the first place. So if your cells are not making enough CO2, what happens is your body will just instinctually start to shallow breathe and hold its breath. And this occurs very often when you have anxiety, general anxiety, or panic attacks or depression. You might notice if you check in with yourself that you don't really breathe very deeply or very frequently. And then especially if you get older or very metabolically sick, you'll have sleep apnea, where it's your body literally holding its breath during the night without any conscious input. And the reason for that is because your body is not producing enough CO2 to sustain respiration. So your body instinctually reduces the rate of ventilation of CO2 in order to retain enough to maintain those processes. And then your health can get so bad that isn't even enough. And that's when you have really severe problems like requiring a CPAP machine. So again, it doesn't really help to do these manual practices because it is a biochemical process, and even manual retention of CO2 can't reverse that problem, because you need your cells to actively be producing sufficient amount of CO2 in order to maintain those robust pathways. One of the other problems that occurs from this is that our body does not only use CO2 and oxygen as respiration substrate. Our body uses, like, for instance, our body uses CO2 also to help manage pH. CO2 spontaneously converts into both carbonic acid and bicarbonate in an aqueous medium. And we also have enzymes that rapidly hasten that conversion as well, called carbonic anhydrase. And because our body requires CO2 or bicarbonate in order to help maintain pH in the body. And that's one of the other reasons why your body will shallow breathe instinctually when you're not producing enough CO2, is because it's required for so many processes. You need to retain enough in order for things to work normally. So like if you're having a panic attack, you can use bag breathing to like increase your CO2. That'll help you calm down. But long term, the resolution of these issues requires that your cellular metabolic rate increases so that you export more. So you synthesize and export more CO2 in your body in the first place. And you cannot fix these problems until you do that. So another funny thing that happened too, like when I was first getting better, and I was actually having success doing this using a lot of things. There's a lot of strategies on these in my book and on my website. Like I talk about this kind of stuff, like basic, like fundamentals are like carbohydrate intake. Like you can't, like one of the reasons that I got to this place where I had cancer and had breathing problems and thyroid issues was because I dieted all the time. I had body dysmorphia and trauma from my childhood. I valued myself on how I looked physically, my sex appeal, stuff like that. When you have and actually I brought this up to some people the other day too. I find it interesting, like when, like for instance, I think this is one of the reasons too why it was so difficult for me to fix my health and behavioral problems, was because like if you're female and you don't eat enough, it's usually identified as an eating disorder. But if you're male, it's called dieting and exercise. Or, if you're female and athletic, then you can get away with eating disorders because you're doing it for athletic reasons. There's no such thing as dieting. Dieting is an eating disorder. Whenever you try to monitor, limit, measure, control your intake of nutrients, of calories or carbohydrates or fats or whatever, that is an eating disorder. There is no scenario in life where you need to do that, and everyone's motivation for doing it is always for Well, not always, but the far majority, a good 90% of people that diet and stuff are do it for reasons of vanity. For we desire for other people to perceive us as sexy and attractive and valuable, and doing things like starving yourself and avoiding carbohydrates so that people will think you're sexy is a behavior based on trauma. You don't need to do that. Your value as a human being is inherent to your existence, not what other people think of you or evaluate you for. And that can be very hard for a lot of us to really comprehend and understand. I know it was for me. That really drove a lot of my depression and anxiety as a young man, and because it originates from very severe trauma in your childhood, where you encountered abuse and neglect and poor characterizations of your worth as a person. And so it can be very difficult to like resist or overcome those traumas, but there is never any reason to diet. You don't need to diet. You can get healthy and good looking just through using proper science and biology information like is presented in my books. And dieting also gets you worse outcomes anyway, because it induces metabolic disease and causes you to be more susceptible to like pathogenic infection and stuff like that through nutrient deprivation. And so, for instance, one of the reasons that as a 34-year-old, like I have cystic fibrosis and I've had it my whole life. So this was a big factor in why I got so sick so young and so quickly. But that was also driven by my chronic dieting and excessive exercise that I was engaged in, because you literally need carbohydrate for your mitochondria to respirate on. They cannot respirate on anything else. They have to have carbohydrate. So if you go on low carb diets or you don't eat enough carbohydrate, you cannot respirate in the first place. We talk about CO2. The C in that formula, carbon, comes literally from sugars. The sugars are a mixture of just different combinations of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And literally the CO2 that is in the carbon that's in CO2 comes from carbohydrate that you eat. It can come also from fats and protein, but mostly it comes from carbohydrate. And when mitochondria, like a lot of people that are pro dieting culture will talk about like fat burning, for instance. But when mitochondria use fat as a fuel substrate, that causes mitochondrial fission, where mitochondrial density is reduced in cells, so they produce less CO2. Because when carbohydrate is available, hello Jamal, welcome, nice to see you here. When mitochondria have we as mammalian primates are primary evolved to respirate on carbohydrate. When mitochondria have carbohydrate, our body understands it as a symptom of plentiful nutrient in our environment. So it increases mitochondrial density, meaning more mitochondria are made. When mitochondria metabolize fat instead, our body understands that as a signal of nutrient insufficiency in the environment, because our cells release fat when there is not enough carbohydrate available. That's why doing for that reason, that's why a lot of people recommend low carb diets in order to lose weight, because it burns fat. But actually burning fat as a fuel source in your body for energy reduces your production of CO2, because the body only does that when there are not carbohydrates abundantly available in the environment. And it understands that as in terms of our evolutionary biology as an alarm signal that there's not enough food in the environment to sustain a high metabolic rate. So then you get the opposite. You get lower metabolic rate from fat burning, and you get higher metabolic rate from carbohydrate burning. But of course, as you get older and you get more metabolic disease, you can get to a place where your body has a really hard time even metabolizing carbohydrate. And you get certain diseases like, for instance, diabetes. Diabetes comes also with cystic fibrosis. It's real fun, let me tell you. in states of diabetes, you have higher circulating free fatty acids in the bloodstream, and free fatty acids circulating in the bloodstream automatically inhibit carbohydrate metabolism, because that's the body. This is not a defect of our biology. This is how our biology works. Because our body takes that signal as an indication that something's wrong and that it needs to preserve calories as much as possible in order to get you through times when there's not enough nutrients available in the environment. So like when you do behaviors like dieting and excessive exercise, you're triggering evolutionary survival mechanisms in your body to nutrient stress. And you can't get around that. You really can't. When you're younger, like when you're a teenager or in your 20s and you diet, you might lose some weight because your body is very healthy and has not endured significant metabolic stress. But like for instance in diabetes is caused by ammonia producing microorganisms in the body that have colonized the body, like yeasts and streptomyces bacteria, like I talk about in my book. And when that happens, that impairs, they actually interfere with B vitamins and the absorption of nutrients like sodium and zinc and copper. So your ability to actually respirate on carbohydrate becomes impaired, and your body still requires fats and nutrients. So it just directly releases them to the bloodstream, and that downregulates mitochondrial respiration. So you don't produce as much CO2 as somebody without those opportunistic pathogens would experience. But by most people, just like me, induce, even though I had cystic fibrosis my whole life, I caused myself most of the metabolic problems I was having from dieting, from a desire to be fit and sexy, because I was so traumatized and I had such poor estimation of my own self-worth and stuff like that. And if I had just eaten enough fucking food, I would never, because I did have these health problems. Now I'm able to do this work and help people, but like, I'd rather not have had to do this, going through those things. I almost died several times. Yeah. So these breathing techniques don't really do anything to fix them long term. You can use them short term to cope with the acute symptoms of respiratory deficiency, but long term they absolutely do nothing to fix it. I learned Vedic meditation when I was I think I was 26 when I first learned it, maybe 27, and I did it for quite a few years, and it's really nice. I mean, it's really nice to do meditation. It's very peaceful. With Vedic meditation, you can sit down and enter a trance within 5 minutes of doing it. It's really profound. But the thing is, even I learned that meditation when I was 26, and it's a lot like Beauty Echo in that it greatly slows down your breathing rate. Like when I would do the meditation, my breathing would slow down to absurdly slow rates. Like literally, I would only probably take 4 or 5 breaths, or 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 breaths a minute. It would slow down so shallow and so slow. It was really cool, and it would induce lots of relaxation. But I learned that when I was 26, and by the time I was 34, I had full-blown cancer. I couldn't even walk around the block with my dogs without running out of breath. That those breathing techniques and that meditation and the yoga that I did, that none of that did anything to prevent those problems, nor did it do anything to fix it, because it is based on the electron transport pathway, dependent on carbohydrate, mitochondrial function, biochemical reactions that are what underlie these processes. You absolutely cannot manually affect it. It is chemical, it's biochemistry. So let's talk about the ways that you can actually affect your breathing in a positive way. So fundamentally, like I said, respiration hinges on carbs. Full stop. That's the most thing. When you have most people that have anxiety disorders also have dieting behaviors. Sometimes they're not aware of them. I every single person I've ever known with bipolar disorder does not recognize when they're hungry. So they'll actually go for quite a while without eating and not even recognize that they need to eat. But everyone else usually that has anxiety disorders usually practices some form of dieting. Like you may like, maybe you don't like, maybe you're like me when I was younger, what I used to think it was a real demonstration of willpower that I would get up and not eat breakfast and I'd go work out. That's one of the worst things you can absolutely do for your health. When you exercise without blood sugar, the elevation in stress hormones that turn your lean muscle into usable protein and sugar so that you don't fucking die is so high that it can literally start to destroy your internal organs. And it definitely prevents you from putting on muscle in the first place. Excuse me. The first thing to go when you engage in excessive dieting and exercise is your lean muscle. That's why a lot of bodybuilders nowadays, younger bodybuilders, they've really become wise to this kind of stuff. Although a lot of them still use really unhealthy supplements and steroids and stuff like that. But going without carbohydrate or doing cardio, lots of cardio is the absolute best way to reduce your muscle mass, because both of those processes rapidly consume carbohydrate and you run out of it very quickly. And then after you run out of carbohydrate, you would die. We would literally die if we didn't have carbohydrate in our body. So what our body does is turn your lean muscle. Your muscle stores carbohydrate. And so it catabolizes your muscle to release all that carbohydrate that's stored in the muscle in the form of glycogen. Muscles don't readily release their glycogen to the environment. The liver also stores a lot of glycogen, but only the glycogen in liver is released to the body during low blood sugar states. The glycogen that's in muscles the muscle has to be torn down in order to release that. So that's what happens when you starve yourself. So if you don't wake up and if you don't eat breakfast first thing in the morning, like, I tell this to a lot of people that I coach, like the time of day where your stress hormones are highest is actually the morning when you wake up. Unless you don't eat, then they continue to rise and get higher. Because when you've been sleeping, you haven't eaten, for like what, 8, 10 hours, sometimes 12 hours. Like when I was growing up, like the French really know how to do it. Like they eat dinner like at like 8, 9, 10 p.m. at night usually. Even if you have a family, they eat dinner late at night. French children come home from school. They have a tradition called goûter. I think that's how you say it, where children are allowed for a period of time right after school to eat as much chocolate and pastry and candy and fruit as they want. They just like get to indulge on what. Of course, it's French like sweets, so it's not like cheap fucking American candy. It's like actual like patisserie and confectionery and stuff like that. But it's all like sugar. It's like hot chocolate and nuts and candy and pastry and whatever. And then that gets put away, and then they eat dinner at like 8 o'clock, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. But when I was growing up, we always had dinner like 5 p.m. So like if you have dinner at 5 p.m., especially as a kid, and then the next time that you eat isn't until like 7 a.m. the next morning, 6, 7 a.m. the next morning when you get up for school, you go literally more than 12 hours without eating. And so you get American parents who have young children whose bodies are not very large, who don't store very much glycogen, having dinner with their families at 5, 6 p.m. in the day, and then put their kids to bed. And their kids they can't sleep very long because they don't have very much carbohydrate storage. So their kids wake up within like 2 or 3 hours of going to bed. So you have brand new parents who are like up every single night with their kids who won't sleep, thinking that that's a normal part of parenting. It absolutely is fucking not normal. The reason that your kids wake up so late at night is because you didn't feed them enough food, especially carbohydrate. So like if you do have dinner early, always send your kids to bed with dessert, like ice cream. But don't use cheap products that have like gums though and stuff. Like if you give your kids ice cream that has carrageenan in it, it will have exactly the opposite effect. You have to buy good quality food that doesn't have emulsifiers and fillers in them. But if you give your kids high quality, good ice cream before bed every single night, they will never wake up during the night. They will sleep through the entire night. And so will you, consequently. And it's funny too, because even though I have like several siblings who all have kids, it took me years to get them to listen to me, to even fucking try that. And once they did, they finally, like, their kid, after having like 2 or 3 kids and being up for several years every single night, they finally like got normal sleep when they had, even when they had brand new babies, because they just were feeding them normally the way that you're supposed to. And so that same principle happens to us as adults. Like, your body cannot run on air. When you don't eat, your body starts eating itself. That's how the body works. There are no exceptions to that rule. So if you wake up in the morning and you don't eat food, your body's going to start tearing itself down during the day. And that's going to reduce your CO2 output. That's going to induce anxiety, because the reduction of CO2 output decreases, hello, phallus, the reduction in carbohydrate reduces your output of CO2. That reduces the intake of oxygen, because remember, that's all dependent on each other. And so then you start to get anxiety attacks and panic attacks because you're starving yourself. And then if you have metabolic disease, it's that same problem. And usually metabolic disease also is accompanied by conditions like anxiety and depression and insomnia, and those all stem from insufficient cellular metabolism and respiration. Yeah. So the fundamental requirement for healthy respiration and enough CO2 production is literally just eating carbohydrates. Start every morning with lots of carbohydrates, especially fruit. Just, tons of it, as much as you want, whatever tastes good for you. Just avoid common wheat though, because common wheat is really inflammatory and also contains because of the gluten content. But not all gluten is bad. Just like common wheat has been bred to be like really, really, the gluten in it is just impossible to break down. So it causes bad inflammation. But also common wheat is also fortified with other problems that can also cause. Oh, actually, so this is a direct contributor to this kind of issue. So there's something else that occurs in our metabolic stress, where when our body is chronically colonized by pathogens or metabolic disease, our cells produce what's called this is a complex subject. So our body uses nitric oxide for a lot of functions, and a lot of you already know what nitric oxide is. Nitric oxide facilitates sexual arousal, getting an erection, whether you're male or female, and the delivery of increased delivery of like blood to muscles when you work out, or to your brain constantly when you, like, especially if you are thinking hard. Nitric oxide facilitates endothelial relaxation. Endothelial is the lining of the cardiovascular system, and it increases blood flow throughout your cardiovascular system. We have this function because sometimes your body does not want to increase blood flow. For instance, if you're cold, blood flow increase to the skin increases heat loss. So we are adapted to have vasoconstriction, the opposite, when you're cold, or it's winter, or you have or you have low body temperature. So nitric oxide for that is really good, but not all nitric oxide is great, and it depends on where it's made. So endothelial nitric oxide is good for us, but when nitric oxide is made inside of cells, it's called inducible nitric oxide. They're the same molecule. They're not structurally different. It's just more where they are, which is the issue. But inducible nitric oxide, what it does is it actually inhibits mitochondrial respiration. And the reason it does that is actually to protect our cells, because the act of respiration also results in the production of reactive oxygen species. That's the entire reason for energy production and respiration is oxidative respiration. And we're talking about, the movement of electrons and protons here in various processes, and you're on an atomic level of energy production here. There's always the risk of inappropriate oxidation occurring that can disrupt, or not even just oxidation, but also inappropriate reduction. Like, for instance, if electrons leak out of the mitochondria at inappropriate times, then they inappropriately reduce molecules and atoms that don't necessarily want to be reduced or shouldn't be reduced. That will then cause like other oxidative damage. For instance, if it reduces I don't know off the top of my head, but just it's just bad. And so our cells produce nitric oxide in part to help to actually restrain oxidative stress by inhibiting mitochondria. So because it literally stops the process of respiration, because it's like a runaway nuclear reactor. A runaway nuclear reactor is unstoppable and just causes all this radiation leakage, right? Our cells stop mitochondria, so that same process stops happening in our cells, so that it doesn't cause uncontrolled uh, atomic chain reactions that end up destroying a cell. So the presence of inducible nitric oxide is important for our cellular function, but in excess, it causes excessive inhibition of mitochondria, so that then they don't respirate sufficiently to sustain enough CO2 output to reverse metabolic disease. And this kind of thing was like a really big barrier, like for instance, for me personally, like when I was rehabilitating my physical health, I was doing all sorts of things to try to restart my mitochondria, like taking carbohydrates and B vitamins and using progesterone. Like I mentioned earlier, like thyroid strongly regulates the process of respiration, and progesterone very strongly promotes thyroid function. So especially because I was dying of cancer, using progesterone was very useful for me in warming my body up and helping me actually respirate and produce more CO2. But sometimes there's actually a side effect that's really good to know about as well, like when you're getting better. Because this threw me for a loop, and thankfully somebody was around that enlightened me to this, was that remember that CO2 and oxygen displace each other, right? So as I was getting better and I was consuming more carbs and taking progesterone and doing other things, my cells started to produce an abundance of CO2. And that actually had the effect of excessively displacing oxygen. And that in turn actually caused me to start having heart palpitations. And that really scared me because my body was already so ill that I thought it was a symptom of things getting worse. If you are getting worse and you have heart palpitations, that is bad. But when you're getting better, if you start having heart palpitations, it's only because of the excessive amount of CO2. And because CO2 is actually very protective of mitochondria, it's not bad. What's happening if you encounter this issue yourself is that your body is still instinctually shallow breathing and holding its breath. And the reason that CO2 was building up so much in my body, besides just producing a lot of it, was that I still just wasn't breathing normally because my body was so used to having such insufficient amounts of carbon dioxide. So I went on a forum and asked for help, and somebody mentioned that I just needed to breathe more. And it was very insightful for them. It's actually one of the only real times that other forum members were actually helpful, but it was very helpful for me. And so basically, like if you do start doing this stuff and you experience issues like that, you check in with your breath. If you're shallow breathing or you're holding your breath, try to practice not doing that. And then, because the thing is your body doesn't shift immediately. You have to have high CO2 output for a few months before your body starts to do that on its own. And it will happen. It does happen. It happened really fast, and that never happened to me again. And it's literally been like 9 years since I started doing this stuff. So, it's actually, you actually have to get really sick to get to that place. And so if you are having those issues, like your body is really bad off. But it's also why it's actually so easy to reverse, is because like you really don't have to do too much to reverse these things. There's a lot of advice on forums that continues to perpetuate these problems in the first place. Like number one, obviously, is just eating too few calories. Like most people come to my work for help. I mean, come to me for help, or come to forums for help because they just want to fucking get skinny. And you know what? Like, if that is your conception of health, you are missing a lot of information that is causing you to continually have health problems. Um, Being sexy is not the end all be all of health. Like, you have to first take care of your health if you want to be sexy. You don't get to just be skinny. If you diet at all, your health is just going to continue getting worse. You need to be, even if eating makes you fat, that's what you need to do to keep yourself from getting worse. And you can get skinny later. And you need to learn to love yourself in spite of how you look, which is a whole different process. I mean, I have, other videos and an entire book about child abuse, overcoming child abuse. But so that's a bigger problem to tackle and much easier said than done. But you do need to, like, you do not need to be sexy like that. That is always born out of insecurity and trauma. Your worth as a person is infinitesimal, and it's not measurable in things like whether or not you have a six-pack. Also, and a lot of us don't realize too, a lot of you don't realize that, like, we, especially because we have such a long lifespan now as human beings, you will live the far majority of your life as an old person than you will as a young person. You're only young, up until you're maybe 30, I think. Probably 30 is probably, like, I think, the cutoff between old and young. I mean, you can look young until you're 40, but after your 30s is when you really start to mature. Peak sexuality in human beings is between 30 and 35. And for those of you in your 20s, like, you haven't hit your peak yet. Peak is at 30, 35. And peak sexual maturity. So if you live to be 70, 80, 90, 100, like, you will spend the far majority of your life as an old person. And if you're going to spend your entire life valuing yourself based on whether or not you're skinny or you have hair or, muscles or whatever, like, you're going to live a really sad life. It's going to be very stressful for you. You're going to do a lot of insane things to yourself and to other people. That's not the point of living. The point of living is not to be, for other people to value you. The point of living is for you to value yourself and to enjoy life as it is. And you do that through things like eating. And yes, it's good to take care of your health. It's good to be able to respirate, especially since I've been experimenting with oral infectious bacteria and my health in terms of cystic fibrosis. It's not fun. It's very burdensome. It gets in the way of other things I'd like to do, like date. But I learned through, obviously, like, through the like inventory practices. And if you don't know yet, all you here probably do since you're subscribed, but like, and I mean, you're here. I made a YouTube video that summarizes the psychology therapy that I made, that I promote, that helped me to overcome all of my past experiences of trauma and abuse. It's on this channel. It's the inventory therapy video. You can watch it for free. And my book on child abuse talks all about how child abuse happens, how to understand it, how to resolve it, how to prevent it. And I'm saying this because in my mind, I'm also, like, specifically thinking of this one person that, like, I was trying to help coach a while ago, who's an older gentleman, probably in his, like, mid 40s. Wait, I'm in my mid 40s. What am I saying? He's also in his mid 40s, but he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s, like, overweight, literally chained to a CPAP machine. And so I'm trying to get his diet fix and figure out what's going on with him. And he started gaining more weight, and he got really mad at me and quit coaching because he wanted to be skinny. Never mind the fact that he has to sleep every fucking night with a machine strapped to his face. Like, that is more important. Like, it doesn't matter what size of jeans that you wear. Like, it's, we want to get you to where you don't have to have a machine strapped to your fucking face every single night. You don't get there by taping your mouth or by taking supplements or by learning breathing practices. You get there by facilitating mitochondrial respiration, and that happens through substrate-like carbohydrates, B vitamins. Okay, so I was talking about nitric oxide though. So nitric oxide when it's made inside of cells, is called inducible nitric oxide, and that inhibits mitochondrial respiration, the very thing we're trying to achieve when we're trying to reverse metabolic disease and increase respiratory capacity. There is a very common toxic factor in our environment that replicates this function of nitric oxide, which is that all commercial wheat products in the United States that are made from refined flour are fortified with thiamine mononitrate. And nitrates get rapidly converted into nitric. Actually, nitrates are even more powerful inhibitors of the mitochondrial respiration, and nitrites as well. Nitric oxide, nitrite, and nitrate are all related to each other. Nitrite is the oxidized form of nitric oxide, and nitrate is the oxidized form of nitrite. So the more oxidized that nitric oxide gets, the more oxidatively stressful it is, and they're stronger and even stronger inhibitors of mitochondrial respiration. So growing up, like, you know, especially in places like the United States and other countries that have fortified flour as the basis for all of our breads and pastas and other things that are made out of wheat, actively inhibit mitochondrial respiration. And this is actually one of the major causes of metabolic disease in places like the United States, where there's an abundance of metabolic disease, is literally the fortification of flour with these kinds of ingredients. People that do it think it's great because you're adding thiamine to the flour, but in fact, the nitrate, and I also can't fucking believe that people don't know this is a problem, because nitrate, it has long been established that excess environmental nitrate is toxic. Nitrate is a byproduct of agricultural in the agricultural industry. Nitrate is the entire purpose of putting artificial fertilizer into the soil. It's ammonia, it's nitrogen. So nitrate runoff from agriculture used to be such a problem that it actually killed children. It got into water, it poisoned their mitochondria, they died from an inability to respirate. It's really bad news. And the fact that it's actually just added to our wheat flour supply is fucking insane. It's like so psychotic. Like no one is running the store. So basically, like if you eat common wheat, it's not just the gluten that's the problem. It's also the fortified iron, because pathogens use iron to cause disease. And it's not the same kind of iron that's like in meat or in foods. It's like literally just iron shavings. I heard that there's a YouTuber that made like a video of like he used like a magnet to like extract the added iron in flour and then made something out of the iron. Really funny. But that iron is bad news, and the addition of thiamine mononitrate is bad news, and there's lots of other things that they add to that are really bad. So basically, like environmental nitrate exposure like that is also really harmful when you're trying to increase your mitochondrial respiration. An antidote to that effect of nitric oxide on the inhibition of mitochondria, though, is sun exposure. When sunlight hits the mitochondria, it actually pushes nitric oxide off of the mitochondria. So you can see how the function of that nitric oxide is like a regulatory mechanism, where sunlight availability is a feedback mechanism that stimulates and enables mitochondrial respiration. And in fact, actually, like one of the respiratory enzymes in the mitochondrial respiratory chain actually reacts with red photons of light. And the enzyme cytochrome oxidase, it's a little molecular rotary motor. It literally spins around just like a generator. And the red photons of light drive that rotary motor, and it generates free energy. When people say, you know, when dumb people say that like we're not like plants, we don't get energy from sunlight, they don't know a fucking thing about human biology. Human biology is very much like photosynthesis. We do get free energy from sunlight. It's not quite as like independent, or not independent, but like it's not quite as simple as photosynthesis, but it still is free energy from sunlight. And sunlight very directly regulates mitochondrial respiration too, not just from its interaction with mitochondria. When you don't get enough sunlight exposure, the body actually increases the expression of torporific hormones like melatonin, and melatonin actually downregulates your respiration. So if you're also trying to treat your insomnia and other metabolic problems by taking melatonin, you're actually decreasing your metabolic respiration and the amount of CO2 that you output. And there's nothing worse that you can do for anxiety disorders than take melatonin when you're trying to go to bed at night, because that actually makes it all worse. Melatonin is often described as an antioxidant and shows like health benefits, which it does because it provides that role in our body, but it does that through stopping mitochondrial respiration. It doesn't do that by scavenging. It does lots of things, scavenge reactive oxygen species, but the reason that melatonin shows antioxidant activity is not because it scavenges reactive oxygen species, is because it literally downregulates the processes that make the reactive oxygen species, which is mostly our mitochondrial respiration. So when you get sunlight, it lowers your trophic hormones, so it endocrinologically also upregulates your mitochondrial respiration, as well as directly promoting respiration by actually stimulating your mitochondria directly. So getting sunlight exposure every single day is one of the most powerful things that you can do to increase your CO2 output. Of course, that's not going to happen if you don't eat enough carbohydrates and stuff like that. So you have to, precede that with like a good breakfast. But going out and getting sunshine, one of the reasons it feels so damn good is because it's literally giving you free energy, literally helping your body respirate. You might notice too, warmth also helps to like increase mitochondrial respiration. So you might notice that, like, for instance, like if you go sit out in the sun, or if you like go in a steam room, you within like maybe like half an hour to 45 minutes, your heart will start beating faster and you'll start breathing more. And that's literally because your mitochondria are producing more CO2, which is the end goal of all of these like breathing techniques, which demonstrates again how it is a chemical reaction. It's not going out in the sun is behavioral, but it's not like you can't mechanically increase CO2. It has to be biochemical. So you do that through these methods of stimulating mitochondrial respiration. So sunlight exposure helps to reverse a lot of those issues that inhibit mitochondrial respiration. And help knock nitric oxide off of the body. Okay, so since for all of you that are here though, I'm going to share something with you that's coming up in my book update that I'm really excited about. So that has very much relevance for this topic. So, and this is, I'm not going to get into the details, but basically one of the biggest problems behind metabolic health is reactive oxygen species, and one of the worst reactive oxygen species what's called the hydroxyl radical. Most reactive oxygen species, like hydrogen peroxide or superoxide or peroxynitrate, we have enzymatic strategies for reducing those reactive oxygen species so that they stop causing oxidative damage. Like vitamin E will stop the reaction chain. Vitamin C sacrifices itself for reactive oxygen species. Glutathione, which is made by our body, does the same thing. Superoxide dimutase reduces superoxide into less harmful hydrogen peroxide, and then peroxidase enzymes consume hydrogen peroxide. And but we don't have any of those methods for the hydroxyl radical. And the hydroxyl radical is also the most reactive of all the reactive oxygen species. So the hydroxyl radical production in the body is one of the most oxidatively damaging reactive oxygen species that can occur in metabolic processes. And the hydroxyl radical occurs from normal metabolic activity. So I think superoxide can randomly generate it. But one of the primary ways that the problematic levels of the primary way that the problematic levels of the hydroxyl radical creates oxidative damage in the body is from pathogenic organisms using the iron that they acquire, which is why iron is helps promote. I mean, we obviously need iron for our growth, but when pathogenic organisms get a hold of iron, they use it to split hydrogen peroxide into two reactive hydroxyl radicals. So they literally produce so much hydrogen hydroxyl radical. And hydrogen peroxide is made also for the immune reaction. So doing this actually inhibits the immune reaction and makes it less effective in the body. And then also causes massive oxidative stress. So the body fails to kill invasive pathogens while also being subjected to more oxidative stress. And I've been working on this for like a really long time because I couldn't figure out how to because this causes another problem too, because this also causes like nutrients to become hydroxylated. Hydroxylation pathways in our body are very important for a lot of things, but if they happen at the wrong time or in the wrong place, it actually severely disrupts those processes too, because hydroxylation can activate things, but it can also destroy and inactivate certain things depending on where and what it is. And the production of hydroxyl radicals in the gut causes the hydroxylation of nutrients like zinc. It can form like zinc hydroxide and copper hydroxide. So then you get like a zinc deficiency and copper deficiency and all these other problems. It's really, really bad and really destructive. It turns out that one of the reasons that fruits and vegetables are so healthy for us is because they contain what are called cinnamic acids. And in fact, I kind of have coined that term because cinnamic acid is usually just associated with cinnamon, but it's present everywhere in all sorts of fruits and vegetables. And there's also all sorts of phenolic derivatives of cinnamic acids like ferulic acid and chlorogenic acid that are related to cinnamic acid and just as important. And cinnamic acids actually consume the hydroxyl radical, and that our natural resistance to the hydroxyl radical and its oxidative stress comes from eating fruits and vegetables. That's one of the reasons why I said this already, but that's the primary reason why eating fruits and vegetables is actually so healthful for us, is that their cinnamic acid content actually neutralizes hydroxyl radical stress. And that's where we really get our defense from the hydroxyl radical oxidative stress, is through eating fruits and vegetables. And so cinnamic acids are the flavor compounds responsible for in fruits. So like when you eat like a really good nectarine, and it's just like so good that you can't believe that this kind of thing exists. Like what you're tasting are the cinnamic acids that are in that nectarine, or in oranges and orange juice, or really good grapes and peaches and plums and pears. There's also cinnamic acids actually though in potato and celery and carrots and sweet potatoes. It's basically everywhere, and it's why eating fruits and vegetables is so good. And also conversely, why eating primarily meat and grains is not, because those are not high in cinnamic acids. Fresh fruits and vegetables are. And so like when you're like me as a child raised mostly on meat and grains, you don't get, and dairy, you don't really get the protective effects of cinnamic acid. So you become more susceptible to metabolic disease literally because of the uncontrolled effects of hydroxyl radical stress in your body. So relevant to this though too actually is because there's some studies out there that suggest that nitric oxide production, inducible nitric oxide production, is a defensive mechanism against oxidative stress. Nitric oxide can also cause its own oxidative stress, but what it does is it reacts with more oxidizing substrates like the hydroxyl radical. And I have come to discover through my research and experimentation that the excess of inducible nitric oxide that inhibits mitochondrial respiration is a response to excessive hydroxyl radical stress produced by chronic colonization with pathogenic microorganisms that destroy hydrogen peroxide using iron as a defensive mechanism against our immune response. And so then our body creates nitric oxide because it is established firmly that when you have chronic colonization of cells by pathogens like viruses, or or anything, fungi and parasites and whatever, that they produce more nitric oxide. And exactly why isn't not very clear. Scientists don't really understand that yet. I've come to find out through my work now that it's because of cinnamic acid deficiency, because you haven't consumed sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables to actually supply enough cinnamic acids to neutralize the hydroxyl radical stress. So, and there's another really interesting aspect to this that ties back into my earlier work, which is that I discovered and pointed out and emphasized that there's no such thing as sex addiction. That sex addiction, sexual arousal is highly stimulated by nitric oxide. And when people suffer from sex addiction, what's actually going on, it feels like an addiction because it is compulsive. Like your body is compulsively sexually aroused, basically against your will. Don't get me wrong, what you do with that is totally within your willpower. And acting on sex addiction is very harmful, but the actual act of being aroused chronically and compulsively is a function of excess nitric oxide. And for any of you that have read my book, I point out in my chapter on erections and libido that resolving excess nitric oxide resolves also compulsive sexual arousal. And I've come to find out, and and not only that is because of these same principles of CO2. Like I also point this out in my book in my chapter on libido, that sexual health and virility is dependent on CO2, because while nitric oxide facilitates actual arousal, CO2 protects mitochondria in like your testicles and ovaries and your labia and your glands and your corpus cavernosum, so that they work properly when stimulated by nitric oxide. CO2 is actually the primary mediator of sexual health, not nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, because it inhibits mitochondria, over the long term, actually directly impairs virility and libido. Because long term, it can excessively inhibit mitochondria. So then the mitochondria in your cells can't regenerate cells or produce enough energy to regenerate cells. So then your reproductive organs start to atrophy, and then they don't respond to the presence of nitric oxide. And so the more, and it's really ironic because a lot of my brain's starting to sputter out. A lot of erectile dysfunction medications actually function by increasing the half-life of nitric oxide. So they actually accelerate aging and mitochondrial decline if you use like Cialis and all those other Viagra and stuff like that. Because all nitric oxide does is stimulate an erection. It does not maintain your reproductive organs. Giving your reproductive organs a break from your mitochondria, a break from nitric oxide, is what allows that to occur. So, and this is why like sexual dysfunction often accompanies metabolic disease, is because the compulsive sexual arousal that occurs during excessive nitric oxide is a response to metabolic aging. It is an adaptive survival mechanism in human beings and other animals as well, to try to increase mating in an animal that is very close to expiring, as a way to try to pass on and procreate before the expiration of the adult of the organism. So people that suffer from sex addiction, what's actually happening is your biology is trying to compel you to mate in order to try to pass on your genes before you potentially die. But because we also live in a highly technologically advanced society where you aren't likely to die, and we also have fucking thiamine mononitrate being distributed in the wheat supply, you can trigger this compulsive sexual behavior in the vast numbers of people and population because of the function of nitric oxide inhibiting mitochondria on stimulating sexual arousal. And like literally one of the reasons that we have such high rates of sex crimes, like in the United States, for instance, is because of the addition of thiamine mononitrate to wheat. Because as soon as anyone that eats excuse me, pizza or pasta or sandwiches that has already mitochondrial dysfunction, it will force sexual arousal. And you do that chronically, like you're literally eating this for like every single fucking meal. Our bodies respond to excessive nitric oxide stress, nitrosative stress, by forcing sexual arousal. Yeah. And then over time, and especially because of, other societal factors where people feel entitled to indulge their sexual compulsion, then you get more problems. And that's just, I'm not going to get into that now, but basically biochemically underlying all this, there are massive populations in these forums where you get people who are stressed sexually. You got guys in like the nofap communities who view sex in terms of negativity, where they think sex is bad, where they think masturbation is bad, where they've been told to think that they're bad for wanting sex. You're not bad for wanting sex. Nobody's bad for wanting sex. You can jerk off all you want. You can have sex all you want, as long as it's consensual. There's nothing wrong with porn. What's going on in people in populations like this is that your mitochondrial respiration is being inhibited by excessive nitric oxide from a diet low in fruits and vegetables, not enough sunshine exposure, and consumption of nitrate fortified foods. Also, I didn't mention this, breads and wheat products aren't the only ones with nitrate. Also a lot of prepared meats like pepperoni and sausages all have either things like sodium nitrate or sodium nitrite, it's one of those two, or the addition of celery powder, because celery is actually really high in nitrate as preservatives in those meat products. So you can also, so it's even worse, like if you have and for instance, like when I buy like sausages and stuff like that, I've been buying like the ones that are pre-cooked, like Neiman Ranch, like pre-cooked breakfast sausages. They're just fucking amazing. It's such good meat, but it's they don't, because it's pre-cooked, there's no nitrate preservatives in it. But yeah, so sunlight deficiency, what was I saying? Oh, sunlight deficiency, insufficient intake of fruits and vegetables. And I mean, when I say insufficient intake of fruits and vegetables, I mean the fact that you are not eating as much fruit every single day as you can possibly get your hands on. If you don't have a shitload of peaches and apples and pears and oranges piled on your kitchen table to just eat whenever you fucking want, you're not getting enough fruit. Fruit needs to be especially like one of our primary like food sources as a human being. So insufficient intake of fruits and vegetables, sunshine deficiency, and consumption of exogenous nitrate sources, so like fortified wheat products and preserved meats. All of those contribute to the inhibition of mitochondria that causes dissatisfaction and dysregulation of sex and libido. And so all these communities of like people that are like no fap, trying not to whack off all the time, but they're compelled to whack off all the time. I mean, there's a reason why these people are so psychotic. And it's because when your body is like trying to force you to have sex and you don't want to, yeah, that's going to make you feel really shitty. But guess what? On top of that, if you have sexual dysfunction like this, even when you do have sex, it's not fulfilling. And that's one of the reasons too why you don't feel great after you have sex, because literally like the metabolic inhibition that's causing these problems in the first place also impairs the healthful like emotionally fulfilling aspects of sex that normally occur. after you have sex, like, you know, with yourself or with a partner, you get like a dopamine release and an oxytocin release, and you feel happy and you laugh and you're just like so excited and you want to go out and just like conquer the world. That doesn't happen when you have sexual compulsion because of the mitochondrial inhibition by these same factors, because you need respiration on carbohydrates and abundant production of CO2 in order to actually feel those feelings that you get from normal sexual activity. So then you get these dumb people in nofap communities who think it's because Jesus doesn't like them and he's mad that you whacked off. That's not what's happening. It's literally like CO2 deficiency caused by nitric oxide inhibition of mitochondria. So if you do these things, you get a whole lot of metabolic benefits besides just like, you know, increase in mitochondria. You can fully resolve like libido problems and sleep apnea and get more energy and grow your hair back and all this other stuff that mitochondrial energy production is so dependent on. So on that note as well, like, and it, because obviously it sounds like it is cinnamon is really high in cinnamic acid. You can also supplement cinnamon daily. I've found that daily supplementation of like a quarter teaspoon, half teaspoon of cinnamon is the most potent inhibitor of inducible nitric oxide that I've ever found. And it's even more effective if you also obviously pair that with generous fruit and vegetable intake. Because I say cinnamic acids, you don't want just cinnamic acid. Like, don't just go get like oil of cinnamon and use that. That's not going to be the same thing. This includes ferulic acid and chlorogenic acid and all these others. Like even like curcumin, that's a constituent of turmeric, is derived from cinnamic acid, actually. So all of the acids that are derived from cinnamic acid all have these same effects or similar related effects that are important in other ways too. So like, so just like this is not something that you want to refine down to its constituent parts and then take that supplement. You need to use whole food. So like generous fruit intake daily, and then just add in like a quarter teaspoon, half teaspoon of cinnamon with that, like in a smoothie or however the fuck you want to do it, like in sauces or jam or whatever. You know, I love making like cinnamon toast out of my spelt bread, and I'll make cinnamon sugar toast every day. Well, not every day because I mix it up, but like, you know, and then you can take it, and it's actually like cinnamic acid actually has a or its metabolites have a really long half-life in our body, so you could supplement it daily for like 2 weeks, and then once you start to experience the benefits of that, then you can do it less often. It can be like every few days or whatnot. But it's so effective in reducing a lot of these issues. So actually, this stream is kind of like an introduction to how cinnamon can actually also promote mitochondrial respiration. Because remember, I've discovered that the production of inducible nitric oxide is primarily in response to the hydroxyl radical production by invasive pathogens trying to inhibit our immune response to their presence. And so then you need a corresponding increase in cinnamic acids to meet that increase in hydroxyl radical synthesis in order to prevent the excessive nitric oxide that would otherwise inhibit the mitochondria. So so it's very effective in actually supporting this, all of these efforts as well. And my book update will be adding like cinnamic acids to all the information on like mitochondrial respiration and things that are related to that as well when I release it. So this is one of those things that I was working on, why my update hasn't come out yet. But it will be out very soon. Yeah. So, you know, obviously two other things that are needed in mitochondrial respiration to produce CO2 are like B vitamins. You know, for a long time through a lot of my work, I've recommended the use of brewer's yeast because it's like a really good source of B vitamins. Normally, B vitamins don't come from supplementation. They come from our diet and as well, but more often they come from our healthy commensal microbiome. But that's way beyond the scope of this stream. My book talks about that, gut restoration of the gut health, so you can restore B vitamins. The short chain fatty acids that they make also help, and I talk about that stuff in my book. Also, though, one other last thing that's really important for mitochondrial respiration is vitamin K. And like, I have an entire stream on vitamin K, how you can't fucking supplement it. That is not the same thing. You need to get it from the diet. There's no other option. That entire stream talks about vitamin K if you have a hard time with that, but otherwise just like eat some fucking vegetables. I know, my work is born of Ray Peats, and then people get mad at me because I recommend vegetables as if they fucking know more about Ray Peats' work than I do. Ray has said things that sound anti-vegetable, but he's not correct when he talks about vitamin K and vegetables. Like, vitamin K is our source of, vegetables are our source of vitamin K. You cannot supplement vitamin K to replace the intake of vegetables. There's a reason that we eat plants as a human animal species. We've never been able to just take supplements until like the last 50 years of human existence. Also, our gut microbiome make 13 different versions of vitamin K2 from vitamin K1 that's in plants. And you cannot replicate that with a supplement. It's just not possible to do that. You can certainly take a supplement of vitamin K if you want to or need to. It can certainly help to reverse vitamin K deficiency, but it does not replace the need for dietary forms. Most importantly of all, most importantly of all, our entire gut microbiome, all the commensal healthy microbes that we rely on, they use vitamin K in their respiration chain. So if you don't eat vitamin K, your gut microbiome dies off. And guess what? That's not a good thing. Hello, also Atticus. Hi. That is not a good thing. What happens when your commensal microbiome dies off is that opportunistic pathogens move in to take their place. And you cannot evict those with antibiotics. C. difficile and H. pylori, they're all antibiotic resistant. So if you kill off your own gut microbiome, you are more susceptible to pathogens. So you have to sustain your gut microbiome, like using vitamin K. And vitamin K also helps our own mitochondrial respiration as well. I won't get into it now, but calcium is important for the function of mitochondria, and vitamin K facilitates the calcium function in our body and all this stuff. So you just gotta eat your vegetables. I mean, there's just no other way around that. For anybody that's doesn't like hearing that or disagrees with me with Ray Peat stuff, the stuff that Ray Peat says about that kind of stuff is not wrong. It is the application of that knowledge that is often misguided in forums interpretation of what Ray says. So for instance, yes, there are plants and plant compounds that are harmful to our body. The way to use that information is not to avoid all vegetables. That's fucking stupid. It's the correct way to do it is the proper preparation of certain foods and dishes and stuff like that. Oh yeah, sorry, Ward, I didn't read your comment. Reminds you of the fat of using cinnamon to lower blood sugar. I don't know that I ever heard that. But it would, in a good way, because cinnamic acid would directly promotes mitochondrial respiration, so that would cause cells to take up more sugar to actually convert it into energy. So you're actually burning the sugar rather than just blocking sugar uptake. Yeah, totally. But I'd never heard it used for that, but it does do that. Oh yeah. So cooking, for instance, kale, I actually have cravings for kale. It's really weird. And also if you haven't ever heard me talk about that, what you crave for food is a direct reflection of the composition of your microbiome. Plants are difficult for the body to break down, for the gut to break down. And if you don't crave vegetables, it's because you don't have a good microbiome. And so your body craves foods that are easy to digest, which are like meat and dairy and refined grains and all that stuff. I did not start craving vegetables until I had been ravenously consuming fruit daily, because there's no better way to restore the microbiome than by eating carbohydrates and fruit. So once, after I discovered AP and I learned a lot of science that he'd been sharing and discovering, I started eating fruit daily, especially like smoothies in the morning just out of fruit. And I'd never done that before. And literally only took like 2 months of that for my microbiome to improve. And then all of a sudden I started craving like collard greens and kale. But like those, like you shouldn't eat those raw. Like the like Ray mentions a lot in his work. He mentions like phytic acid as like as an anti-nutrient, and it very much is. But the reason that you cook foods that are difficult to eat, like kale or collard greens, isn't things like phytic acid, is actually like enzyme inhibitors. Like if you actually were to take a raw like spelt berry, like wheat berry, but don't eat wheat, remember, but spelt and einkorn and kama, totally great. If you were to eat one of those raw, like, or not one, like literally try this. If you have some wheat flour, some spelt flour, or some lying around, not sprouted, but like a spelt berry, if you put them in your mouth raw and chew on them, they will never dissolve in your mouth. it will just become chewing gum. And that's because of enzyme inhibitors that actually inhibit our digestive enzymes. A lot of people think of saliva or stomach acid as breaking down food, but they don't really do that. The enzymes in our body and our saliva and our digestive juices are primarily responsible for breaking down food. They chemically dismantle nutrients. And so a lot of plants have evolved enzyme inhibitors to prevent that. So if you say, for instance, you're to eat a raw kale salad, you won't really digest it at all, because the enzymes in it, the enzyme inhibitors in it, block our digestive enzymes. So they can be bad for you. But the way that you get around that is by like cooking kale. Even just a little bit of heat will destroy digestive enzyme inhibitors. So cooking kale then in turn liberates all of its vitamin K and other nutrients. Actually, it doesn't really, because then you also still need your microbiome. That's why like plant foods are hard for the body to digest, is because we don't have enzymes to break down cellulose. So then you also need your microbiome to do that. And if you don't have a good microbiome, you won't crave vegetables, because your body can't even really break them down in the first place. So if instead you restore your microbiome by eating a lot of fruit and carbohydrates, then you'll acquire the microbes that are required to actually break down tougher vegetables like spinach and kale and all that jazz, especially if it's cooked. And then you'll benefit, your mitochondria will benefit, because you actually are finally absorbing vitamin K into your body, which is one of the most catastrophic deficiencies if you have it of that. So so that was, I didn't realize I was going to get so impassioned about respiration this time. But yeah, I also didn't even realize I was going to talk about sex addiction. But yeah, respiration is directly related to like sexual compulsion. So like if you suffer from sexual compulsion, where you feel like you have to just like get off all the time, it's literally because your mitochondria are not respirating enough, and there's too much nitric oxide burden on your body. So you need to get sunshine daily. You need to eat lots of carbohydrate, and you need to supplement cinnamon every day, and then it'll go away. And actually too, like you might hear that and you might be like, oh, like there are things. So for instance, like, yeah, okay, this is really relevant for this discussion too. So, a lot of information on nitric oxide also orbits, supplementing lysine. And I actually do talk about this and recommend it in my book, so nitric oxide is primarily made from citrulline, which is made also from arginine. Actually, so citrulline, arginine, and proline, and ornithine, and even glutamate can interconvert all with each other. And they are potent sources also of ammonia production by pathogenic organisms in our gut. But we need them in order to do a lot of things, most importantly, which is to make nitric oxide, because nitric oxide is really, really important for our body. A lot of people don't realize that our brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the entire body. And one of the major functions of nitric oxide is to make sure that the brain gets a continuous, adequate supply of blood flow to keep it warm, to keep it oxygenated, to keep it supplied with nutrients. And so nitric oxide is indispensable for our health. So you don't ever want to cause a nitric oxide deficiency. You need to understand the difference between endothelial and inducible nitric oxide. Oh wait, why was I saying that? Oh, so in my book I talk about the harms of excess nitric oxide, and arginine entry into cells is actually inhibited by lysine. Lysine competes with the same pathway for arginine. So if you supplement lysine, it'll actually reduce your nitric oxide burden. And that was one of the strategies that I've used in the past to help to control these issues. And it really does work. Like it can really strongly help to reduce mitochondrial stress, help your mitochondria respirate better, relieve stress, and help to treat like sexual compulsion. But the problem is that it can also inhibit your arousal ability at all, like your erectile ability at all. And when I say erections, I mean women too. I'm not just talking about guys. Women have erections too. It's just a lot smaller. So, cinnamic acid, though, doesn't do that, because cinnamic acid just blocks the hydroxyl radical production in mitochondria that's part of the oxidative stress that's causing these problems in the first place. So if you actually, so you can actually just use cinnamon instead of like the lysine strategies that I talk about in my book. And it does not impair, it actually improves because it helps protect mitochondria from nitric oxide inhibition and oxidative stress. It actually causes an improvement in your sexual function, like makes your sexual organs more sensitive, they tumesce more, they're more responsive, erections last longer. And also because, fertility, sexual organs are for fun, but also they facilitate reproduction and reproductive issues. And I coach people that are infertile all the time that need fertility help. Infertility is caused by these same issues, usually by pathogenic organisms or dieting behaviors that impair mitochondrial respiration. And so by restoring normal reproductive function through these kinds of strategies, you also can help improve your own fertility. Like if you're having trouble reproducing, conceiving, stuff like that. So anyway, so this has really, really broad implications for a lot of these issues. Actually, but yeah, so anyway, so that's respiration. Yeah, don't bother with the mouth taping, and if you're on a CPAP machine, some of the other things, I talk about these in my book, some other tools that promote respiration are thiamine, but don't use thiamine mononitrate or thiamine hydrochloride. Get any other form, use brewer's yeast as B vitamins, niacinamide. Aspirin can help a little bit too. Aspirin actually helps a lot to raise mitochondrial respiration, but on its own is not effective in reversing these issues long term, because remember, this is based on human biology. You need to restore the biological pathways that are relevant to these problems, which include everything I've been talking about, like sunshine, fruits and vegetables, all that stuff. I think my brain just finally gave up on this stuff. Okay, but anyway, streams. And at the end of the main topic, I talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. So if you want to ask me questions, go ahead, and we'll talk about stuff until you guys run out of questions. But as a last note too, respiration is fundamental for how cells work in the body, and restoring thyroid function, but also remembering too, because a lot of people don't know this or don't realize this, is like a lot of forums and a lot of places that recommend these kinds of strategies, like mouth taping or using CO2 canisters or dumb things. That, remember, that's dangerous to do. You can asphyxiate yourself. Don't understand that you can't force the body to do what it doesn't want to do. You have to coax it back to health. You have to provide all the things that it needs. And that's not even through supplements. You have to start with diet. You have to start with behavior. You cannot diet. I mean, obviously I just use diet in the two different forms that it means. You have to have a good diet, but don't diet. Do not deprive yourself of carbs. Do not deprive yourself of calories. If you get fat, that's fine. You got to deal with it. You've got to learn to accept yourself in spite of that. If you're with an asshole who doesn't like you because you're fat, leave their ass. You don't have to be fat. Like, resolving a lot of these issues reverses being fat, so you don't have to be. But that's not the point. If the goal of being healthy is to be skinny, you're never going to be skinny. You just aren't. And like I was coaching this person that like I wasn't coaching them really. They'd been orbiting my work for a really long time, and then asked for help when they started suffering really severe cardiovascular disease. And they had been dieting for years, just like under eating carbohydrate, under eating fat, because they didn't want to gain weight. That's the kind of consequences that you pay for starving your body. Your body absolutely cannot survive without carbohydrates and sufficient calories. And if you get fat as a consequence, it's because you're colonized by opportunistic microbes that you need to resolve, not starve yourself. Because starving yourself will cause you lots of more really serious complications in the long term. Just like me, it can give you cancer and thyroid disease and insomnia and cardiovascular disease. And, for instance, like very specifically, sorry, I need a drink. Very specifically, cardiovascular health depends on, I have a whole chapter on cardiovascular health in my book. Depends on the constant flux of electrolytes through cells. Calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium. Those channels need to be working properly to prevent cardiovascular disease. And the channels that move calcium, sodium, and potassium through the cells, most of them are dependent on ATP, which is the energy molecule that our cells make. So when you diet, you literally cause heart disease because your heart, the pathways in the cells required to move the electrolytes that maintain cardiovascular health don't work because they literally just run out of energy. And you literally kill yourself when you diet and starve. It impairs mitochondrial respiration, which impairs the production of energy, which all these other pathways are also dependent on. So you can't do it. There's no workaround. Doesn't matter if you tape your mouth shut. It's not really about CO2. It's about energy production. And so your the CO2 is just a like how the pathway works. So like bag breathing and taping your mouth shut, it's not going to do shit for you if you aren't eating enough carbohydrate. So yeah, so feed yourselves, take care of yourselves. That's how respiration works. So yeah, anyway, nobody asked any questions. You guys really don't want questions before we go? If we're done, I will go. Ask a question. You have 30 seconds. Like I said, if you're keeping up, like my book is going to be released soon. This was one of the things I was working on. I have a few more little things to work on to finish, but they're going really well, so it should be done soon. Yeah. I'm excited for it. Especially because I'll fucking be done with it finally. So anyway, I appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much for being here. This was really fun. I like to stream more often. Oh, if you also didn't know, I just released my... Oh, it's too late, Atticus. Ask it quick. I already hit the see you later page. I put up a video for inventory therapy, and after I release my book update, I'm going to do, I'm not committing to this, but I'm going to do once monthly, like, I don't know, like the first of the month or something. Yeah, you can do that. You can email me. So, I'm gonna do like a monthly live stream where we talk about psychological health and inventory therapy stuff. So do your inventory therapy. And then I'll do a stream where you guys can come in and you can ask me questions about psychology, and I can answer your direct. Oh, are you Atticus? Sorry, I forgot about that. I don't remember if you probably do you use the same. I don't know if you use the same name on Patreon. You can just remind me when you're on there. Yeah. So, fake YouTube name, yeah. So I'm gonna offer the inventory therapy help on a stream, like monthly, so that people can come. You can ask me about your inventory related questions. So do them, and I'm probably gonna do the first stream pretty soon, as my research on this latest stuff wraps up. I'll have more time and energy to do that. Yeah, so that'll be something fun to look forward to, and I can help you guys like work through trauma and abuse. So anyway, thanks again for being here, everybody. Have a really good weekend, and I will see you later.